Hello, and welcome to the latest in New West Press's series of podcast interviews with authors of new books that New West Press has been publishing. I'm Paul Matwichuk. I'm the general manager of New West Press, and I am very pleased to be talking to Michael Boughn, who is the author of the new mystery Business as Usual. Hello, Michael, and did I pronounce your last name correctly?
You certainly did.
It's like the bough of a tree with an N.
Yes.
And the correct pronunciation of your name is the subject of much debate around the office. You are a poet. I know you only from Business as Usual, but you are also a poet whose previous collections of poetry have titles like Iterations of the Diagonal and Dislocation Flutter. What inspired a avant-garde poet to try his hand at writing a crime caper?
I love them and read them all the time and thought it would be fun.
Did it turn out that way?
It turned out totally that way.
Really?
So much fun.
There was no agony? There was no laboring over plot points that wouldn't work, dead narrative, dead ends, characters that wouldn't come alive?
It was such a different experience from writing poetry in the sense that you enter into this world with these characters and they start doing things, and you kind of get dragged along behind them, and then you try to run ahead up front and make some plot points and see what happens, and just the whole experience was a delight.
Really?
They ended up doing things. You hear fiction writers say this, that the characters did something they hadn't expected, and I always took that with a grain of salt, but in fact, they do.
Is there an example? I mean, we haven't described the plot of it, but and I don't know if there's anything that doesn't give away big twist, but is there an example of where that happened?
Yeah, when David and Claire go to visit the elderly woman in the seniors' home, and David ends up stealing something from her. I had no idea he was going to do that until he actually did it. I was like, okay, it's good.
Well, maybe before we get in too deep about discussing the book, we should describe the setup of the book. What's the book about? Who are the main characters, and what are they up against?
The main characters are a couple of academics, one successful, one somewhat marginal, who become involved in a situation where toxic chemicals have been dumped illegally on the Niagara Escarpment in Ontario and have damaged the grapevines of a friend of one of the two main characters. So she gets hired to, they don't realize at the beginning what's happened, and she gets hired to find out what's going on with the vines. And
right. Her specialty is
botany.
Botany, yeah.
She's a botanist, yeah, with a business on the side. And it gradually, they become entangled in this unfolding conspiracy.
And I guess and David, the male academic, he sees this as, I guess he's enjoying the idea of playing detective, and I guess he's also at first hoping that he can parlay this into some kind of a magazine piece or something like that, right? He kind of tags along on the trip, and he's kind of to a large extent he's kind of like the engine that keeps them sort of pursuing clues. And
that's right, yes. He's having a ball.
Yeah.
and he's thinking that, maybe he can make some money off this. The perennial quest of the writer, right, to actually make money, especially the poet.
It's a pretty ambitious story for a first attempt at a mystery, because you've got the David and Claire story, you've got the amateur sleuth angle, but there's government corruption in it. There's a lot of scenes involving some mob guys. There's the business with the vineyard, the guy who runs the vineyard. There's the tech angle with a friend of Claire's who's this kind of proto-computer hacker. All these corners of the world that you have to at least give the appearance that you know something about, and a lot of jigsaw puzzle pieces to fit into a coherent narrative.
Well, that was the marvelous thing about actually writing the book, was realizing that you can, I don't want to use the word illusion, but clearly that's what's at stake to some degree with language. You're creating a picture in people's minds, and you need to know a certain amount in order to do that, but you don't. It's surprising I don't want to say how little you have to know because that probably wouldn't be good. But it's surprising what the limit is on that actually. In order to create a convincing illusion, what you don't need as much as you think you might need.
Mm-hmm.
Well, mind you, I did a lot of research. I read a lot of books on high-tech stuff and MIT and the mob, and I did a lot of research. But to create that illusion, what you need is just the right gesture.
Right, exactly. That thing that just sort of seems like it really only one gesture can do it, can't it? Right. Like one gesture that is just sort of that is unexpected, but feels like this feels like inside knowledge.
Yeah.
Yeah. There aren't too many novels I can think of that are about academics trying to solve a crime, and I wonder why. There is so much juice to be had, it seems, in the idea of these two worlds colliding, of people who live in a sort of rarefied world of ideas and the intellect who have to kind of confront the messier real world of chaos and crime.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't answer that question, Paul. You're right. You're absolutely right. It's an ideal kind of situation, right? Because I think what got me started on this was many years ago I had to teach a course on, I think the course was called the detective novel. And I read a bunch of stuff on the analytic detective novel going back to Poe. And I found it fascinating, the way that, I can't remember the guy's name now. I think the book was called The Red Queen or something. He also dealt with Borges and some of Borges' stories, detective stories. Mm-hmm. But the whole idea of being able to reconstruct knowledge from what appears to be evidential was what he was getting at, and how there's a whole world behind that possibility, just even to imagine that possibility, that there's a connection between that object and some knowledge that reconstructs a whole series of events, which, we take that for granted in some sense. And he was talking about the fact that that's very specific to our world, and it's indicative of certain very specific mental structures, I suppose you could say.
Yeah.
So anyway, I found it fascinating, and that's what it goes back to. That actually, the idea of wanting to. These guys seemed perfect for that, because to some degree that's what they do, right? That's what that's the world that academics live in, creating arguments about texts and objects, and here we had one scientist and one guy in the humanities, and it was perfect for me.
Right. And there's a certain, with a very light touch and a very deft touch, the book is in dialogue a little bit with older detective novels. I mean, they kind of self-deprecatingly refer to themselves as Nick and Nora Charles, although he is the Nora and she is the Nick in that relationship.
When it started off, when I started writing this book, my wife said to me, "Don't you dare write a book with some macho male detective hero." Mm-hmm. And I said, "Okay, what am I going to do? I'm not Sarah Paretsky, so I can't really do that, right?" So I decided to do the couple, and then this is another one of those moments, right, where I put them together, and early on in the book, he raises Nick and Nora Charles out of nowhere. I'd forgotten completely about that, and he raises it, and it's perfect because it also opens up the opportunity to explore the relationship between the two characters and the contemporary politics of feminism and gender and all that.
Well, certainly, like the movie of The Thin Man is one that always just seems like, oh, now that is an ideal marriage, right? Of just, where the two of them just enjoy each other's company so much, and they have no end of quips and no end of martinis, and it says here that you were shot in the tabloids. That's a lie. I never came anywhere near my tabloids. And all that just seems like the ideal way to live your life and to shoot ornaments off the Christmas tree with your BB gun. But I don't know if that is like a practical model for an actual real-world relationship to be conducted.
Well, it's also incredibly sexist. I mean, if you go back and watch those movies, and even if you read the book, if you go back to Hammett's book, I don't know how he got away with it, but it's terribly sexist. I mean, Nick orders Nora around. And
does he? Oh man, I have a much. I guess I have a real rose-colored glasses memory of those movies.
You should check it out again. Actually, just take a look. I did too, and I was because I watched all the movies as part of my research in the book, and it was quite interesting actually. I mean, you're right. I love the martini part, but they're drinking martinis for breakfast.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. How satirical did you want the portrait of academia to be? Because it could easily have been, these two being a kind of bumbling, clueless sort of pair of ivory tower intellectuals, and the book is much more subtle than that. I mean, they get in a little bit over their heads, but they're not total dummies either by any means.
Yeah, I guess there's certainly a bit of satire there that comes out of personal experience. I don't want to get into too much detail about that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's there. It's totally there. So I mean, he softens towards the end of the book, and that was I thought, a good thing. I was glad he did.
Well, why don't we hear an excerpt from the book? You've got a passage that you've picked out to read. Does it need any kind of a setup?
Yeah, well, it's towards the end of the book, and they are David is coming back to a loft where his friends are, and he realizes that they are in serious trouble, that some really heavy guys have got them in the other room.
Okay.
And I'll start there.
Okay. This is Michael Boughn reading from his novel, Business as Usual.
Oh, let me just say one more thing.
Okay.
The events in this book take place in 1993, so it's amazing that you have to contextualize these things. But the computer monitors in 1993 were big, heavy things. They were they're not like our little flat screen things that we have today, right?
I remember very clearly, yeah.
Yes, I'm sure you do. He heard another voice. How many were in there? He could try and look, but if he stuck his head out, they'd see him. Think. Okay, think. How many? He closed his eyes, his heart racing, his mouth dry. He tried to swallow, but couldn't. 3 guys anyway, probably more. Jesus, what was he going to do? He leaned against the wall, trying to catch his breath each moment in agony. His limbs were frozen. Voices droned in the loft. There was a sharp scream. It sounded like Benji. Call the cops, he thought. He looked around the room and saw a phone on a little table next to one of the leather chairs. He forced himself off the wall, went to it, picked it up, and punched in 911. Police, fire, or ambulance, a matter-of-fact voice asked. Police, he whispered into the phone. There was a click. He heard voices in the other room. Douglas moaned. Jesus, what were they doing in there? State the nature of your emergency, a voice said. Shh, David whispered. They've got guns. There's 6 of them. They're in the other room. They've got hostages. He scanned the room for a weapon. Anything. State your name and address, the voice said. David told the voice the address. What is your name? The voice demanded again. Hurry, David said, then put the phone down, leaving the line open. There was nothing, a chair maybe. He tried to pick one up, but it was too awkward to wield with any power. A keyboard? If it was a factory, there'd be lots of potential weapons, but high-tech was not much use that way. Then he saw the broken monitor. What the hell, he thought. He moved the chair next to the door. Then he whipped the power cord out of the back of the monitor, knelt down and disconnected the data cable at the computer. He picked it up. It was heavy, but he didn't have to hold it for long. He carried it over to the door. He stood on the chair, got his balance, then kicked the wall. He took a deep breath and hoisted the monitor over his head. The voices stopped in the other room. Someone said, check it out. Will there be 1 or 2, David wondered. Shit, what am I going to do? His arms trembled with the weight of the monitor, and he thought he might not be able to hold it much longer. The door swung out. A gun came into the room, followed by a man. The man looked up startled at David. He brought his gun around, but David had to jump on him. The monitor was already coming down with all the force of gravity and every bit of strength he had. For a moment, their eyes caught. David registered every detail of his face. The thin lines around his eyes, the scar along his jawline, the pimple at the corner of his mouth. The man looked scared. That surprised David. Then the monitor hit him. David had expected it to knock the guy off balance, or maybe, if he was really lucky, knock him out, disable him somehow anyway. Then David could use the diversion to draw the others away from Claire, or at least keep them busy somehow till the cops showed up. That was as much of a plan as he had come up with. Instead, he watched the man's eyes disappear into the monitor as the cracked screen imploded around his head. The man shrieked and staggered backward, clawing at the smoking monitor case. He looked to David like a character from one of those futuristic cartoons, the Jetsons or something. A little skinny body and a monitor for a head, except for the blood pumping in a strong stream out of his neck. David almost laughed. Instead, he dove for the gun the man had dropped, scooped it up, and ran into the loft. Is that enough?
That's great. A scene from the action-packed mystery novel, Business as Usual. Yeah, I admire, one of the things I admire about the book is that the very scene in the book, that they're not merely serving plot functions. There's always something going on with David and Claire's relationship as well. You know, there's always some bit of jealousy that flares up during a scene, some bit of friction, or some bit of the two of them coming together. That seems to really, I don't know, kick the book up to the next level to me, that there's more than one thing going on in it at any given time. And it feels like that's something that you were thinking of as you were writing it.
It definitely was. For me, the real mystery of the book is their relationship. You know, it's the mystery of how two people actually can come together and negotiate all that has to be negotiated in order to keep a relationship going. I love the rest of the other mystery too, but that was always hovering there for me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I thought, you know, why not? There's no reason that you can't include some kind of serious consideration in a mystery novel. I mean, just because it's got certain conventions that it has to realize doesn't mean that it can't move beyond those conventions towards some further realization.
Right, right. Also, one of the other things that's very skillfully done is it's that so many of the scenes are set up as set pieces. You know, that opening chapter, for instance, it was such a pleasure to kind of sit down with this book that our board had selected for publication, and so, you know, I'm sitting down to read the book, and right from that first chapter, you just feel like, okay, I am in good hands with this book. You spend a lot of time in that opening chapter with a character who, you get a complete, thorough portrait of a character who, spoiler alert, gets killed off right away. Yeah, and I love that you spend the time to make that guy into a real guy. Like, you kind of care about this guy, and you feel really terrible at the end when he doesn't make it to the rest of the book.
I really liked him. I loved Bernie, actually. He was close to my heart.
He's he's a guy doing a job.
He's a truck driver from, I lived in Buffalo for a number of years, so
mm-hmm.
But I also worked in Toronto for a transport company for, 8 or 9 years, scrapping loads on semis. So in both worlds I had contact with people like Bernie. So he comes from a working class part of Buffalo, and he grew up in a circumstance where, the line between what's legal and what's illegal is pretty blurry.
Mm-hmm.
And he ends up working as a truck driver for somebody who eventually crosses the line in a big way. But he just goes along with him because for him it's a job.
Yeah.
He's just doing his job.
Well, that comes through in so many of with so many of the characters in the book, even the ones who are working on the wrong side of the law. It's one more damn job with the boss that doesn't appreciate you. The money isn't great. There's all sorts of hassles and coworkers that you don't get along with. Like it feels very true to life and very kind of amusingly so as well.
Well, it's business as usual in many different ways.
Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of those chapters. They're done. It's not quite stream of consciousness, but it's a quasi internal monologue that you get from there, which I think is a very effective technique. So even when you meet a corrupt businessman with mob connections, you still find yourself thinking, wow, even this poor guy's life is full of more stress than he wants it to be.
Yeah. Well, I imagine it's like that. That's why I wrote it. I do imagine it's like that. I imagine a lot of the stuff that goes on that we know what we hear about, but it just disappears,
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the stories that I drew on for the information about the dumping of toxic chemicals is I got from reports actual reports, reports to the U.S. Congress, reports to Canadian Parliament. This is what people do, and yet we don't even. We're not doing anything about it. It's bizarre.
Yeah, yeah. Would you call it? I mean, would you call the book an environmental book?
No, I call it a political book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's environmental, but that's politics.
Yeah.
It's a very political book, and I drew my inspiration for that from Dashiell Hammett, who's my great hero in terms of the writing of mystery novels. I mean, I think that he's a master. I'm trying to think of the name of.
Well, there's what is there? There's the Glass Key that has Red Harvest, right?
Red Harvest is the one I'm thinking of, where he's got a strike going on in a town, and the Wobblies are there, and you've got these, anti-communist goons who are beating people up, and it's a fabulous book. And at the end of it, it's just all about who's the last man standing.
Yeah.
The Continental Op is no hero. He's not like a Raymond Chandler kind of guy. He's no knight. He's just as dirty as the rest of them. Mm-hmm. He's dirty on a side that is okay to us to be dirty on.
A book that has inspired just so many movies. It's kind of like this invisible influence that has been stealth, sort of these stealth adaptations of it that has come up just over and over again in so many of the great crime movies. I was curious. I can't get you talking about the character of Benjamin, who it's interesting how you handle him, because on the one hand, he's a character who serves a kind of a convenient plot function, that he's one of these brilliant computer hackers who can get David and Claire a lot of information that they wouldn't have access to otherwise. But he's more interesting than just a guy tapping at a keyboard. He's a social outsider who has figured out how to kind of slip deeper into society than practically anybody else, and knows where all of the secrets are to be found.
Yeah, and it all comes back to the question of identity, right? Mm-hmm. That he's, for those who haven't read the book yet, which is everybody, he's a African-Canadian character. And to me, he's really interesting because he exists outside the fixation of identity, the idea that we are something. And he's well aware of the fact that we're not. We can be whoever we want to be. There's a real freedom there that's, first of all, for him, located in a kind of political reality. That is to say, having been told he was a certain kind of person and realizing that wasn't true, and then got realized when he went to MIT and got into computers and the initial formation of the Internet, and where the whole question of identity just completely evaporates, right? You have no idea who you're talking to on the Internet. Mm-hmm. So I found him a very interesting character that way, too. That's where his power is.
Right, right. Why, you mentioned that it's set in, it's 93, right?
Yes.
Why set it in the past?
Do you want to know the truth, Paul?
Sure.
I wrote it then. It wasn't the past when I wrote it. But you know what? It worked out for me, actually. I mean, finally, when you guys finally got hold of it and liked it, after years and years of struggling with people who thought it was too literary or whatever, I was glad that it was in the past, because it gives it a perspective that you don't have with the. Plus, there's the monitor. What was I going to do with the monitor?
Right.
2011.
Do you think the book is the book a cynical book in the end? It's the world seems full of corruption in it, but it also, I don't know. It seems there's also the sense that it can be brought down by a couple of amateur detectives. Is that corruption? Is that institution of corruption flimsy, or is it invulnerable for the most part to people who try and change it?
I fall in the middle on that question. There's you can look at the book as being cynical, and in some ways there's a character at the end, another one of the characters that I really liked, the Irish guy, quite cynical, and who says, yeah, you brought this guy down, but there's 10 more behind him who are coming up. And don't think you really solved anything. But then there's also, David's argument and Claire's argument that, well, you're not going to fix it all, but you have these small battles and you have to fight them, and you keep fighting them, and each time you win one, the world's a better place for it. So don't give up the fight.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And certainly the tone of the book does not, the relationship between David and Claire is so fun, and the sense of adventure and kind of figuring out how to follow up clues. There's so much kind of moment by moment narrative pleasure to be had in the book that it doesn't feel like it is some kind of oppressive statement about everything sucks. No, you know what? And as long as we can have fun, it's good. Yeah. I really believe that. Well, I had to read through the book multiple times as we were getting it ready, and it was always a pleasure to go to get caught up in it again. I'm really hoping that people pick it up. I say this about every book. I'm a fan of every book we put out, but this is really an enjoyable read, and I especially think that mystery readers, crime readers will get a big kick out of it. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. You have publishing it. Oh, it's our pleasure. You have a launch event coming up? Is that right? Yes, there's a launch in Toronto at the Sleuth of Baker Street on October 13th, I believe, 6 p.m. Okay. Well, cool. This has been a great pleasure talking to you. The book is called Business as Usual. It is soon to be available in fine bookstores everywhere and through the New West Press website, which is www.newwestpress.com with only one W in New West, so it looks more like newest. Thank you, Paul, and thanks for the opportunity to talk about it. Great. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it too. Take care.